Welcome to this episode of Think Again with Beyond Blue. I'm your host, Georgie Harmon. We're recording this podcast from Wurundjeri country and we pay our respects to the traditional owners of these beautiful lands. On this episode, we'll be taking a closer look at the relationship between mental health and performance at work, and a particular type of discomfort that surprisingly many people feel. Jono Nicholas is the Managing Director of the Wellbeing outfit and Chief Mental Health Advisor to EY Oceania. Through the Wellbeing outfit, he advises leaders in Australia and internationally on strategies to drive organisational performance by improving the safety and wellbeing of their people. He's previously been CEO of digital mental health service Reach Out and is a director of several public and not-for-profit boards supporting mental health. Jono, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Jono, you and I can talk until the cows come home. And one of the things we often talk about is, what do we mean when we say mental health? What do we mean when we say well-being? How does this thing called well-being, which, you know, is I think misunderstood and a bit kind of popularised at the moment, how does that actually link to productivity? Can well-being actually drive productivity?
Yeah, Georgie, I think the first part is understanding how people in organisations use those terms.
Yeah.
Right. In reality, you and I know that when we use the term mental health, most people hear mental illness. Most people hear anxiety, depression. And when we think about well-being, most of us think about it in actually, how do I feel today? So I think it's important to be really specific. When I talk to organisations and help people think through this, is really focusing on, if you think about how you feel on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the worst I could possibly feel and 10 is the best, what number are you at right now? And the reason...
Is that a question?
That can be a question. We can kind of go there.
7 already.
7. I'm feeling kind of pretty 8-ish at the moment.
Oh, that's very good. That's because you're talking to me.
Exactly. And what I then say to people around, you know, well-being and performance is, if you think about it and you are in the 1 to 3 category, then what 1 to 3 for most people feels like, I can't cope with much more before I'm feeling completely overwhelmed. Now that might be stresses at home, it might be stresses at work, it might be just I've got a lot on. When people say 4 to 5, when you dig underneath it, generally they would say something in my life needs to change for me to feel happy and well. Most people, 6 to 7. I'm feeling actually pretty good. Like things are going well, work's good, family's good. I'm not at my absolute best. I've got some room to grow. And then 8, 9 or 10, when you actually talk to people there, when they give you that number, it's, I've got excess energy at the moment. Like I'm feeling good. I think I can give more. So when we talk about well-being and productivity, what I would focus on in workplaces is, how do we spend most of our time at 6 and above?
Yeah.
What would it take for us to spend most of our time? And when you look at that from a performance point of view, then absolutely the research shows that well-being and high performance is really strongly correlated. And we know this colloquially as well. If you change environments, you go for a walk, you have a fascinating conversation, you feel better, you remove some of that stress, then your brain just works better. And that's really what we're trying to focus on.
So you work a lot with big companies, business, industry. I think a lot of the mythology around well-being at work, mental health at work, mentally healthy workplaces, overtakes the science. And many workplaces are inundated with a lot of rubbish. So pick my product. It's become a whole industry in itself, and I think there's a desperation, certainly from, you know, the people that make the decisions, the people who make the investment decisions. What do I pick if I'm going to do anything that will improve the psychological safety, the well-being, the productivity of my workforce? What should I invest in? What do you say? Like, what's your most sage practical advice to managers and leaders?
So the thing I'd say for leaders to invest in the most is, don't invest in products, invest in your people.
Yeah.
right? Ultimately, organisations come down to people working in teams and working to solve problems, right? If you actually look at the definition of business, business is just a never-ending series of problems, and the only question you have is, do you enjoy the company of people you're solving them with? Like that for me is actually, because if there weren't any problems, we don't need the business, right? So when you actually start it, we start at the things that businesses can control. And then it's really saying, what are the resources that we would need, external and internal, to support our people in maximising their performance? Yeah. And then you look to products and services that are fit for purpose. When we actually look at what it is that most businesses do, most businesses actually monetize brains. Right? When you actually look at the output, I'm Chief Mental Health Advisor at EY, Oceania, it's a service business, it monetises brains. If you're in a legal firm, you monetize brains. The people at Beyond Blue, we monetize their brains, right? Their creativity, their connectedness. And so if that is the central value of our company, then it makes sense that we want to understand how to maximise the performance of that. And so that's where you're starting to see leaders really understand the connection between mental health, wellbeing, good culture and performance, because when those brains are at their best, we create the most value in whatever goal we have.
You've led me to this question. I have to ask it, given everybody, like you can't turn sideways without someone talking about emerging technology, AI, how it's going to dumb us down, so when you're talking about monetizing brains, I read that as our brains, the value of our brains is only going to increase if we adopt new technologies in the right way. Is that how you'd see it?
Everything that I know about AI, and it's already here, by the way, is that it will do repetitive cognitive tasks better than humans, if it hasn't already. So when you look at the link between wellbeing and performance, actually humans can do repetitive cognitive tasks with low wellbeing really well. Like think about how you can just send a quick email to someone and it doesn't require a lot of your brain space. The amount of hours we might spend on a Teams call where we're not the centre of attention, but we just have to be in the meeting. Yeah. Maybe on mute most of the time, sometimes camera on, sometimes camera off. Yeah. But really that's not using a lot of our brain. So if you actually, with AI, strip out all that work, what you're left with your human workforce is just the hard stuff. Yeah. Right? And then we actually see a much stronger link of if AI is doing the things that our brains find easy, faster and better than us, then what we need our people to do is the really hard things that AI can't do. And the case for investing in the wellbeing of the workforce only goes up. And I think that's the bit that people are tending to miss. Yeah.
Because the argument currently is, where's the light and shade in all of this? If we're doing high performance, high thinking tasks all the time, actually those shadows when potentially your well-being isn't great, actually provides you with less cognitive load.
Exactly.
So how do we actually balance the two? And I think the rush towards just adoption has got to be thought about through the well-being lens as well, as opposed to just the productivity lens.
Absolutely. And it also means that we'll think about teaming differently. Yeah. Our thesis at Wellbeing Outfit is that in a world of AI that's removing some of the kind of the cognitive friction of our day, that allows us to have that cognitive relief, that downtime while we're working, will mean that people will crave human connection more. Yeah. We think that companies will want to spend more time on offsites. We will want to slow down and do really deep thinking well. So the way I would look at it is that organisations, AI will do the things that are fast and repetitive more, and the things that we perhaps don't value, and that should free us up to do the things that require us to use our slow brain in the Danny Kahneman sense, the slow brain, the hard work even more. And that means we've got to think really differently about teaming, about workplaces, about our relationships. We've got to think differently about productivity. We've got to think really differently around the shape of the organisation. And most of that will happen, I think in the next 12 months, 12 to 18 months. It's happening far quicker than people expect.
Yeah. We'll come back to productivity because I think it's such a live issue for us as a country at the moment. But I'm really interested in kind of exploring more about one of the things that we hear from people who access our low-intensity coaching services, for example, especially those in workplaces, often talk to our coaches about imposter syndrome. Talk to us a little bit about that and whether or not that's something that you hear in your work with leaders and business, but also how that relates to performance anxiety.
So I have the great privilege of doing coaching and one-on-one work with really senior executives in really big companies. I have not met one who doesn't ask, when will someone bust me? That I have no idea what I'm doing most of the time. Exactly, right? It's so the number one fear of anyone in a position of responsibility is, when will someone realise that I'm not the master or the mistress of the universe?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about imposter syndrome, I always crack up laughing because probably the people who describe themselves that way are just more transparent with the feelings of anxiety.
Yeah.
And what we really have to do, and what I say to them is, congratulations, you're human. Right? You're a good human. Well done, you. You worry about your people. You worry about the responsibilities of leadership. You worry about the work that you're doing. You really care. That's good. You should feel anxious about that. So really, when we come to this, the question isn't, do you feel like an imposter? The question is, how do you manage those feelings to be of most service? Actually, when
service to you or to your people or both?
To the mission of the organisation, and when I often talk with leaders, I say, actually, when you actually look at what leadership is and management is, it's an expression of love.
I love that.
How do you if what love is really about is, in the face of a threat, how do you put the interests of others before your own interests? And you think about the great leaders in your life. In the face of a threat, in the face of a challenge, in the face of a question, do they look after themselves? Do they look after their own career? Do they look after their own reputation? Or do they take a step back and say, actually, no, it's about the collective good? And so when again you come back to this question of well-being, what we know is that when you're experiencing higher levels of well-being, you're more able to put the interests of others before your own interests. If you're scared, if you're threatened, if you're worried, you want people to look after you rather than look after other people. So again, I look at this of what's the case for executives to invest in their own well-being, is that it actually enables them to do the core function of leadership far better. We pay all executives to make critical decisions. That's really their job. And we know that they do that better when they sleep well, when they eat well, when they have time to think, when they're deeply connected to the world around them. They're just better.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I think that is going to be a really powerful story in the next 10 years is whether executives have, as part of their contractual obligations, a core obligation to maintain their well-being. So rather than being something you get around to, it's actually part of your job. And you're starting to see that movement come through really strongly, where leaders are saying, actually, no, it's an obligation to look after my physical fitness, obligation to sleep well. And that's really exploding some of the myths around well-being and performance.
Jono, I love this. I often say the word we hear so infrequently at work and in workplaces is love, and the word we need to hear more of at work is love. You talked a lot about the capacity for leaders to put their own self-care and well-being first, and you talked about how that affects, business decisions, productivity. I think it also creates more capacity for compassion and for the ability to actually listen to your people and listen with a more of an open heart and an open mind. And I think, we've heard so much recently about, especially, since and during COVID, about, good leadership is compassionate leadership, vulnerability, authenticity, all these kinds of things. So that is the kind of leadership quality that people are not just looking for anymore, but actually demanding.
Absolutely.
And, how that actually centres psychological safety in a workplace, how that actually makes people believe that the company doesn't talk the talk, but actually walks the walk, because the leader is actually demonstrating self-worth and self-love.
Exactly. And when you look at it in the reverse, Georgie, you look at something as simple as sleep. We all know that when we don't sleep as well, we lose our temper more, right? It's harder to process information. You want to narrow your world. And if you just look at something like that and say the job of a leader is to make critical decisions, to synthesize complex information and provide directionality. And I don't know one person who says, I do that better on 3 hours sleep than 8 hours sleep. So when we come back to this stuff, and this is what I spend time with executives on, is it's your obligation to be better at sleep. It's your obligation to look after your physical well-being. It's an obligation to stay connected to those that you love. And because it just makes you better at your job. And this is one of the things that I find fascinating, in many senses, the struggle for the workplace. The struggle for the workplace has really been true for over 100 years of people like Henry Ford, whose insight was to remove human cognition and decision making from the workplace, right? That's the assembly line theory, right? How do we remove independent decision making? We had a lot of advances because of that in many senses. And the most recent example of this is Elon Musk, who has been really open about wanting people to sleep under their desk, spend more time at work. And what I find fascinating about this is it goes against the science of what is good performance for most people isn't those behaviours. And what I find amazing about some leaders, and I say this and you often forget, is that on the bell curve of humanity, they don't sit in the middle, right? That just as an elite athlete isn't in the middle of humanity in physical output, they can do things, they might be able to sustain their attention. They might be able to work on low sleep. They might be able to just simply work really, really hard more than most people. And that makes them exceptional. The question that they have to face is that good for everyone else if I'm leading a group of 50, 100, 200, 500 people? And as for people like me who sit in the middle of the bell curve, what we know is that those things don't work. And that's, I think, that part of the challenge when we look at wellbeing in the workplace. Often we look to CEOs and leaders and people who are incredibly successful and don't say, oh, actually, they just don't sit in the middle of the bell curve. In the same way we look at an amazing athlete, who can run a marathon in 2 hours going, I can be like that person. It's like, no, you can't. They're just extraordinary, and celebrate them for their difference.
Yeah.
But don't take the lesson of their life and try and put it on yours.
Yeah.
And very much that's the challenge now in workplaces as we start to look at many of these links and where the science leads us.
You really challenge us to think again about a few things, and there's so much mythology and misunderstanding when it comes to productivity, the link to mental health, psychological safety in the workplace. What are your myths that you really want to bust?
So the first one is that when people are experiencing problems at work, they're experiencing problems of work. When I've now had the opportunity to ask this question probably of thousands of people, what is the source of your stress? Is it the world around you, work, or your personal life? In every time I've asked that, around 50% of the stresses in people's life have nothing to do with work.
Yeah.
And so the first myth is that work can both be stressful and lower your well-being, but it is also, for most people, one of the most protective factors. It's our source of connectedness, our source of meaning, our source of purpose. It means we get to do interesting things. So I think one of the first myths is work itself is a problem and we should spend most of our time trying to avoid it. And you see that, that mythology come through again and again and again. What we know is when people do really meaningful work, spending time doing it is actually really good for us. The second one, when you look at the research, is that people join organisations. They don't. They join teams, right? And we spend a lot of time talking about the organisational brand of Beyond Blue or the organisational brand of Westpac or Coles or whichever organisation we would think of. But ultimately, people spend most of their time with, say, 5, 10 other people, and they want to work in that team, in the marketing team, in the supply chain team, in the service team. And so we've got to really think about teams as the base unit of organisations. There was a great study done in Google called the Aristotle study that people can look up. And what that showed really, really clearly is team performance is more important than individual performance. So individuals matter, but teams matter more. So if we're trying to have a great organisation, the fundamental question that we've got to ask is how healthy are our teams? And the reason being is when you look at organisations, most people belong to 2, 3 teams. So in healthy organisations, individuals need to really easily move between teams, and you need an organisational way of operating that feels common, but each team should have their own culture, and that culture should look special to them. So that's really fascinating, and that really challenges how do we do culture assessments. We often ask for individuals' relationship to the organisation, not the team. We look at recruitment strategies. We recruit individuals, right? When we look at inductions, we very rarely induct people into a team. We very rarely say, here's these 8 other people, you're going to spend lots of your time with them. Here's how they think. Here's what they value. Instead, we induct them into the organisation and the organisation's processes. So they would be the big ones that if we get some of these things right according to the evidence, we will make a really big difference. And probably the final one I would say when it really relates to wellbeing is certain work and time matters a lot more than other work and time. So I have this saying in the work that we do, win the hour, win the day. That the challenge for everybody is to say, what's the 1 hour of your day where you can be great? It might be having a lunch break. It might be doing a really important task. It might be dropping the kids off at school. And just maximise that 1 hour. When you actually look at it over the course of the year, if you do that 5 to 7 days a week, that's one full working day every week multiplied by 50 weeks. You are demonstrably better if you just focus on being great for 1 hour, and you can just be pretty good the rest. So I think when we look at productivity, what we tend to think of is how do you be great all the time, when really what we kind of know is that highly productive people pick and choose their greatness and really focus on maximising key opportunities rather than sustaining high performance at all times. That's actually impossible.
What's the fix from your perspective, from a wellbeing perspective? I've heard you talk about the 4th Industrial Revolution. Tell us more about that.
So the 4th Industrial Revolution, for those who want to look it up, it's the work of the World Economic Forum. And what they're saying is at the moment we are in a flux of industrial revolutions from what they call the computerization era to the AI era. And what they mean by that is that the nature of work fundamentally changes as we change eras, so that the benefit of the computerization era was giving individuals tools to be cognitively productive in separate ways. We could have a mobile phone and a laptop. We don't need to all be together to be highly productive. Think about those benefits that have accrued, since the 80s and the computer coming in. In the AI era, what they're arguing and what we're seeing is that AI will do low-level cognitive tasks, and so it will change what we value. And what they're showing is, and what they're anticipating is, things and skills that have previously been undervalued will be highly valued.
Yeah.
So our ability, our social intelligence, our empathy, our agility, our resilience in the face of complex decision making, all those things will go up. When you actually look at, these factors, they're generally what have traditionally been seen as the nice to have criteria on a job ad. Like, we want you to have all these technical skill set. We want to know you've gone to the right university. We want to know you can work hard. All those things are seen as core. But if you're a nice person who gets on with other people, that'd be handy too.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is a real flip in the valuing of skills coming through. And that's going to be really important for workplaces to create the space for people to develop those skills well. When you look at the science, Georgie, what the science says is it's cognitively easier to be empathetic when you have high levels of wellbeing. It's cognitively easier to be agile and change your mind when you have high levels of wellbeing. So again, we come back to this of well-being and good mental health is likely a cognitive precondition for high performance and productivity rather than a detractor. And so when we look at productivity, I think that's going to be one of the really big challenges. My fear is that the people having the debate around productivity still think about it in the era that's disappearing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they just think about it as to what they've valued: working hard,
exactly.
working long hours, being
inputs, activity.
Yeah, and I just think it will look really different,
And the care economy as well. The fact that we can't measure the fact that people aren't we don't measure the fact that people aren't at work because they're actually saving all of us taxpayers gajillions of dollars a year because they're actually keeping people alive, functioning, cared for, loved, housed, educated.
Yeah. I actually think we've had a really recent experience of what will be in the AI era, and that was COVID. And in COVID, all of us can remember what it felt like to have too much time, but still feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. What we know during that period is that people who slowed down, who gave themselves a hobby, our obsession with sourdough bread being an example.
Not me.
No, did pretty well.
Sourdough did not touch my
sourdough,
house.
gardening,
jigsaws.
Right. When you actually look at what has all those things got in common, is they're complex tasks that ask you to slow down. Do something that required your brain to be challenged in a learning sense rather than just be busy on execution of things that you're already great at. And that, I think, will give us the best insight to what it is that we will have to reframe productivity towards, which is it won't just being busier and busier and busier and sending more and more emails like we do today, or being in more and more meetings that take a long time but were of low value. It will say, how do you do really, really important work that sometimes requires you to be slow rather than fast? I look in base terms like writing. Imagine it's like your job is to write a novel. The best novels in history, the authors wrote them once every 5-10 years. If you want a really average novel, you can have someone churn it out in 6 months. So if you look at that from AI point of view, right, the average things that are pretty okay, AI will do better than us.
Yeah.
What happens if we are the person who goes, actually, we've got to create something of really deep value, but it might mean that we have to work really hard at it over a long period of time.
So what would your fix be for the productivity challenge of Australia from a wellbeing perspective? Like, how does that look in policy?
So if I had one thing that I would start with, I would actually start with changing high schools. That if you talk to teenagers, you talk about and look at what high schools do, they look remarkably similar to the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? And you talk to what kids are coming out with, and it's still, how hard have you worked? How much can you remember in exams? And the question is, in 3 years' time, the extent to which a number of those skills will be valuable. You see this already at universities, like universities going, actually, rather than fighting, the AI revolution, how about we use AI as part of tools? So I think the first place to start on productivity is actually, are we thinking about education and getting our people thinking the right way in productivity? That would be my first one. I think the second one is actually thinking about what is, to your point around the care economy, what does a great Australia look like? And what's our vision? When we say working hard, what does that actually look like? Because most people would say, if I'm working longer hours but more disconnected from those that I love, that's not the life that I want.
And something's going to break at some point.
Something's going to break
your
at
relationship, your mental health, your productivity.
So what I would say on productivity that I would be looking at is, how do you help people over a very long period of time stay at 70% of their maximum output and occasionally go sprinting, right? If I look at this in, how would a high performance athlete look at productivity? They would say, I spend most of my time at 60% of my maximum capacity. Once, twice, 3 times a year, might go into competition mode, right? If you're an Olympic athlete, you focus everything around being great for once every 4 years with really clear markers. And during the week, you're slow. You spend time on recovery. You look after yourself. You do the basics really well. Like, it's actually a really interesting difference when you look at maximising performance. I don't think it's every single day I have to just do lots and lots of stuff. So I think my big fear, Georgie, is that we still think about productivity as doing more and more and more. And
cheaper, faster, better.
And really,
cheaper,
what's
faster,
the
but not necessarily better?
What's the real kind of quality? Like, I think we'll have a flight to quality. As I said, we look at that in Wellbeing Outfit, saying what is the value of what we do, and the value of what we do for organisations is create deeply human, connected experiences with teams. And so when we think about it, we go, actually, all those things that are not that, how do we use AI to make it as efficient as we can, so that we slow down and spend more time with people in deeply connected ways, rather than simultaneously sending emails and opening up laptops and doing things that detract from that single experience. So I think for every company, when we think about productivity, you've got to think about, what is it that we're uniquely trying to do? How do we maximise the repetitive things, so it allows us to slow down and do the human things really, really well.
Jono, the cows are at the front door knocking,
saying
we want dinner. So unfortunately, we're going to have to bring it to a close. I could talk to you forever.
Thank you.
It's been fascinating. You've helped really explode some of those myths and certainly made me think again about a few things. So thank you, Jono.
As always, it's a joy.
Thanks again for tuning in to Think Again with Beyond Blue, giving you a fresh take on the big questions in mental health and wellbeing in Australia. You can rate and review us and find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And if this discussion has raised any issues for you, don't forget the Beyond Blue support service is available 24/7 free of charge on 1300 22 46 36, or visit our website.